Split second. Hello, 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 and welcome to Intercultural Spark. I'm curious about you and your cultural identity and your travels and how you embrace cultural identity with who you are and how you interact with the world. Well, we are going to take a look at that today with my guest, Jamil Khoury. Jamil is the co-founder, artistic director of Silk Road Rising Theater Company, and he is also absolutely positively just brilliant. He's been a cross-cultural trainer. He has, oh my God, he's an award-winning playwright and author, and just really excited to sit down with Jamil and talk today on Intercultural Spark. Hi, Jamil. How are you?
Very good. Good to be here. And with that introduction, I feel under pressure. I've got to really deliver.
That's so funny. That's like George Costanza. It's like, and thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for being here. See you later. Actually, and I'm trying not to gush. I never do this, but for questions, I have a timer because there's so many things I want to gush about with you that I have to make sure none of my questions go longer than a minute. So.
Well, gushing is good, you know.
It's the work that you do is so fascinating. I was really excited. I met you and both your life and business partner, Malik, when you founded the theater company back when I was with the League of Chicago Theaters in 2005. And what I've always found so fascinating is you're showcasing playwrights from the Silk Road, so like Asia and the Middle East, but it is not like one size fits all. Can you tell us about what your objective is? Because the layering and depth of how you represent culture through the art that you show at Silk Road is just phenomenal.
Well, first of all, thank you for that. So my husband Malik and I, we co-founded Silk Road Rising. It was originally Silk Road Theater Project. We started producing in 2003, so that's kind of the inauguration, early 2003. The idea had been percolating really since the attacks of September 11th, 2001, and particularly the anti-Middle Eastern, anti-Muslim, anti-South Asian backlash that quickly ensued in this country, and that continues to play out to this very day. So we wanted to look at gaps of representation on Chicago stages, on America stages, you know, what stories are not being told. And we ran into seemingly random references to the historic Silk Road. So these trade routes that stretch from China to Syria, Japan to Italy, if you include the sea routes. And we thought, wouldn't this be an interesting model of sort of polyculturalism, you know, what happens when cultures meet, collide, coalesce, converse, and also a geographic guide for stories that, you know, once again, were either not being told or were being told poorly, you know, misrepresentation, bad representation, no representation. And we would respond to that with a representation that was grounded in community. So we showcase playwrights, as you were saying, of Asian and Middle Eastern backgrounds. And the protagonist or central character is always of that background as well.
And how because you lived in the Middle East, you're born in the US though, correct? But lived in the Middle East. How did your own travels influence how you looked at culture, or how you, I guess, saw the difference between reality and stereotypes?
Yes, no, thank you. My father was an immigrant from Syria, and my mom is American-born of Polish and Slovak heritage. And so I grew up with a large extended family in Syria and beyond. So many trips to the Middle East growing up, and then spending time really throughout the region in different capacities, working, studying, traveling, writing, so forth, you know, throughout my adult life. And so the experience of living in other cultures, the experience of learning from other cultures, and also learning about one's own American culture and one's hyphenated culture, and how our identities play out and respond and adapt and adjust, was something that was always very fascinating to me, to really address and to get, to explore, and not to be confined or constrained, like this is the one sort of monolithic take on culture X, or,
Well, yeah, but what's fascinating with that, sorry to cut you off, but to yes, and to add to that, I think, my husband's from Brazil. So traveling to Brazil, I always thought this was just my unique personality. Everything about me was just me. And then you travel outside of the US and you start to realize how many things about you are just so US American. Like you can really see your culture when you see it through the other's eyes.
I think every American should have those experiences of
I agree with you on that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. The ability to look at our own country and our own culture from another vantage point, from another position, if you will. And, to me, that's when we learn, we unpack, we become better versions of our American selves, because they're informed. Yeah.
By that. Well, and Brianna, actually, today's the first day that we're also broadcasting live on Twitter, and we have our first question from Twitter. But Brianna wondered how being the child of immigrants shaped your view of the world. And that is for you, but also for anyone who's watching live. We encourage you to send your questions in the comments.
Well, I think there's always an awareness of heritage, which is really key for so many of us in terms of how we understand ourselves, but also having a connection to family members who, they may speak English as a second language, they may speak accented English, they may live overseas. And so your sense of belonging and your sense of community, I think, just by virtue of the experience of immigration, is very broad, and it's kind of transnational. And so for me, it always really enriched my life. I think it made my life more interesting and more complicated and maybe more challenging at times. But, I like to think of cultures as fluid and flexible. I like to think cultures evolve. They're not static, they're not fixed, they're not snapshots in time. So, kind of go with that flow and evolve with it and see how cultures support each other.
Well, I think too, with all the talk, just even in the recent election with identity politics and things like that, I know particularly being white, in the past, it was easy to not necessarily look at the different groups that you belong to, being part of the majority culture. But I find that the more that we evolve language around identity, whether it's race or ethnicity, that I know it's helped me or had me more focus on, being part of Jewish culture or Eastern European heritage. Not that it would supersede being US American, but that idea of belonging, it actually is nice when you expand those audiences that you can connect to.
Well, and you're connected to multiple histories. So, there are white American histories, certainly. And there's the Jewish history in Eastern Europe and the experience of immigration. And, in terms of the question of race, I think because I'm of part Arab origin, I've always had a really complicated relationship to whiteness. I mean, certainly I appear very white, and yet, my father experienced racism. He experienced discrimination, and so I am forever navigating those boundaries. But I don't know. I think life is just so much more interesting when we can draw from all of our cultural experiences. When we aren't just one thing.
So what's interesting about that, and I'm going to lead it into the process that you use for Mosque Alert, but here's what's so interesting because we're talking about what our own identities are, but then there's the identities that people project onto us. And what I find interesting, for as long as we've known each other, I met you and Malik together. Your name is Jamil Khoury. You've got a theater company that's about the Silk Road. I think that I actually just assumed, I didn't see you as white first. I actually thought that you were Muslim or from the Middle East. And it's, so what's interesting is that only, I think, in preparation for this show, you said, oh, okay, well, no, I'm not Muslim. And I was like, wait, what? So I find that fascinating how we see ourselves, but then how society sees us.
Well, I'm often assumed to be Muslim, and
Yeah.
so but I am of a Syrian Christian background, so we're ancient church going way back, and most Syrians are Muslims, and there is a significant community of Christians. There's a Syrian Jewish community, and so forth. But I have a relationship by virtue of being Arab American to Muslims and Muslimness, and certainly my husband Malik, who is an immigrant from Pakistan, came here at the age of 7, and is Muslim. Our relationship is interfaith, sort of, but it's also blended faiths. We sort of pick and choose and benefit from a kind of cultural and religious dialogue. So, I'm assumed to be any number of things. And once again, I oftentimes like to describe, when we talk about race, I like to use the term not quite white, because, these successive waves of immigrants sort of fought for a type of whiteness. I mean, it's one of the sad things in American history because of this racial hierarchy. And I've always seen myself in this space that wants to complicate that or upset that somehow, and also not deny the fact that I'm connected to people who have not benefited from a lot of the white privilege that I benefit from, and the male privilege, and so forth. So it's a tough. They're tough conversations to have, but important conversations nonetheless.
So I want to shift, and again, for anyone who's watching live, we encourage you to ask any questions in the comments, or at least say hello so we know who's here. All right, now I'm going to ask you a question, and this question is clearly halfway driven by how jealous I am of how incredibly prolific you are as a writer. You write brilliant stuff all the time, and you've gotten so many awards for, just plays and things that you do. So could you just talk a little bit about your writing process? I'd love to know something about that. Like, how do you get your ideas? And then how do you find it's your ideas, it's the time, and it's so good. How do you do it?
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, there's never enough time to write. So,
I can only imagine. Yeah.
And finding that time while running an organization and so forth and so on will probably forever be a challenge. Nevertheless, I like to think of myself as an idea guy, and I get sort of really fixated on ideas that are somehow political and cultural, and where those two intersect. And so that tends to drive what I write, or what I'm interested in writing at a given time. And also, just reflecting on involvements that we have, political issues, community issues, and this idea of pluralism, this idea that we are a society comprised of many different communities and many different cultures, and how we can strengthen that, and how we can be a more cohesive society and a more healthy society. I mean, right now we're looking at such a hyper polarized political culture, and just a lot of meanness that exists in our world. And so, my writing is sort of motivated by this desire to create conversations. I'm really interested in dramatized debate or dialogue. I'm interested in, when people of different perspectives are trying to engage each other. It's not the world where, okay, I don't agree with you, so I'm going to unfriend you, or I'm going to block you, or I'm, somehow. No, it's okay, how do we do the work? And that is probably what's most interesting or most compelling for me as a writer, is doing that work with people that, we may not necessarily agree on everything, or we may passionately disagree about an issue, and that, but we're
Sure.
not going to walk away from each other. And
Mhm.
I frankly, I wish there was more of that spirit right now, because it is so easy to say, I'm not going to hear you, I don't want to hear you, I don't like what you have to say. And so the places that I tend to go towards as a writer are those spaces. Okay, let's figure out what the gray is, and let's figure
Mm.
out, because even if you and I passionately disagree about something or many things, we are going to find these areas that connect us. We're going to find ways to link ourselves to each
Mhm.
other, as opposed to, oh, you are my adversary, or you are my.
Right, right, right. We start with friendship first, and then dialogue comes from that, or at least an
Yeah.
openness to listening. Well, I think where you did this incredibly well, and just oh my God, I told you I was going to keep gushing and set my timer if I gush too long, because now I want to gush about Mosque Alert, because what you're talking about, this whole idea of dialogue and identity. So Mosque Alert was created when, I think it was when a group wanted to build a mosque in Naperville, and there was a
Right.
community outcry, I guess, against it, and that prompted Mosque Alert.
So Mosque Alert is based on, there were two actual cases in Naperville
Mhm.
where there was resistance to propose. One was an expansion of an existing mosque, and one was
Okay.
a new mosque building. So the project is a fictionalized account, or a
Mhm.
fictionalized adaptation of those cases, and then several others around the country, around Chicagoland and beyond. And the catalyst for Mosque Alert actually wasn't anywhere near Naperville. It was in Lower
Oh.
Manhattan, with
Oh.
the what was called the Ground Zero Mosque.
Okay.
The proposed Islamic Community Center in close, approximate distance to the World Trade Center, to what had been the site of the World Trade Towers. So we looked at that, and here was this
Mhm.
really beautiful proposal for a dynamic interfaith community center, and all of a sudden the American right wing sort of went nuts about, oh my God, this is desecrating the memory of those who were killed, and this is
Mm.
rubbing salt in a wound. And if you look at what the sort of the very visionary founders of the project, or those who were leading it, I mean, it was all about healing. It was all about that space where Muslims
Mhm.
and non-Muslims could come together. So we started looking at cases around the U.S. and didn't have to look far.
Mhm.
There were certainly several cases in the suburbs of Chicago of similar resistance, where people thought
Mhm.
the mosque proposed and posed an existential threat, that there was some kind of imminent danger if this building was
Mhm.
built. And it was the type of resistance that you would not see directed at a Christian church, or a Jewish synagogue, or
Mhm.
a Buddhist temple, or you may have at different times in American history, anti-Catholicism, or anti-Semitism, or anti-Mormonism, and so. But this was really specific to Muslims at this time, and this perceived national security crisis. So we worked with a lot of the stakeholders in Naperville, the members of the mosque, interfaith communities, and opposition, and the city government, and also throughout DuPage County. And we constructed a story where we would actually ask the community virtually to chime in. I would put up videos that would be a character talking about themselves, or two characters somehow in conflict, and then we would pose questions, and we would have virtual conversations. And that's how it started. So inviting the Silk Road audience, and inviting people from, frankly, around the world, to have a say in terms of how this piece of theater
Mhm.
gets constructed, and that gets developed, written, and eventually staged. So that was a long process, and I so appreciate that
Mhm.
you're sharing some of that with your
Mhm.
viewers right now.
Mhm.
And it became a full-length stage play.
So can I just as a community person, in terms of my experience, because I saw the process as you were creating it, and then also saw the show, and I feel like sometimes it's easy to talk about sort of the academic side of how things done. And I saw that Brianna had even asked, do you find using creative spaces like theater makes it easier, safer to start a dialogue? And wait, and that's so me. If I can just answer Brianna's question to you first, which is what was fascinating is the whole thing of the diet. So this was through a grant. It was the National Endowment for the Arts, correct? You got a huge grant, as I understand, to do this. But what was amazing about it, and I'm going to come back so I can see you full face. So this idea of I found it fascinating from just an artistic, creative point of view. So creating these characters that you would then put on video for input. And some people say, no, I don't think somebody would talk that way, or I don't think they would say it this way. Yeah. So that people from the community could actually have feedback. And that went back into how you wrote the play, which is amazing. But talk for a minute, because everything was, it's not like there was backlash from the non-Muslim community against the Muslim community. This play had characters on all spectrum of, as we say in Jews, we say, you're like really Jewish or not so Jewish. And it struck me that's what you were exploring with the play as well, because you had people at different levels of observance.
Right. Right. Well, first of all, I do want to say one thing about support for the project. There were a number of grants that we received, and I'm afraid to cite them because I fear I will forget. But we did have and NEA support and so forth. So I just don't want to. I don't want to leave someone off.
Wait, for full disclosure, we can get the list and put the full list in the comments afterwards, so nobody gets missed.
Thank you. But I think it was testimony to the process that we really developed, and it was an ensemble sort of thought process, how to make this, how to turn everyone into an art maker, how to turn everyone into a storyteller and a co-writer on this project. And there were just several foundations and so forth who were very curious, like, how will this work? We want to see this. And I have to tell you, I mean, from the writer perspective, or the person who ultimately took all this stuff and created it as a work of drama, it was the most enriching and exciting and encouraging type of artistic process. Yes, I encountered a lot of ideas that I might personally find reprehensible or objectionable or offensive, but I had to sit with them, and I had to sit with people's fears. If someone says, oh, this mosque is they're going to kill us, or there's going to be some horrible, terrorist attack in our community, or, these sort of things that, in my mind.
How did you respond in the moment? If someone says that to you, because I'm sure it happened a lot because it was a hot conversation, how would you handle that in the moment?
We just kind of learned early on to go with it and to pose questions. I mean, if someone is expressing fear to me, I can't tell them, oh, you shouldn't be afraid, or that's foolish to be afraid. We have to sort of work with the fear to undo it, and so I think, posing questions and sharing stories and sharing scenarios really changes people. It really has an impact. I mean, part of the development of Mosque Alert happened on some college campuses. We worked at various college campuses. And I'll always remember an experience at Valparaiso University where the show was produced, because it had some college productions before. And a gentleman from the Valparaiso community who was not affiliated with the university came to the show, and he sat next to me and Malik in the audience. He had no idea that we were involved with the play.
Oh, interesting.
We were sort of sitting more towards the back, and so we just asked him, oh, so what brought you out here? And he said, well, you've heard what the Muslims are doing, right? And we were like, oh, wow. What are they doing? They said, well, they're shutting down all the churches in Indiana. And so he heard the title Mosque Alert as sort of like a call to action. So that's why he showed up. And so, of course, I'm sitting there, I'm Googling, Muslims, Indiana, churches, and there was nothing. There was no, the Muslims are not closing the churches in Indiana. I can assure you that. But this man thought that, he came with that idea. Maybe, he heard it on some radio station. I don't know. But he stayed for the whole play, and I have to say I give him credit for that because it turned out to not be what he was expecting. And I thought, oh, he was probably going to leave at intermission. And
did you get a chance to talk to him afterwards to see what he thought?
He said, "Oh, that was very interesting." He was leaning forward a lot of the time. I mean, he was because the way that it's written, it is all these perspectives, including perspectives that he might agree with, and then some that he might have trouble with. But I saw that it had some kind of impact on him. I'm not saying that he left and became a great ally to Muslim Americans, but I think that there was some kind of maybe change, or at least an openness that just kind of watching him watch the play. I saw stuff going on, I mean, how much of that I'm projecting, I don't know. But he wasn't angered by it. He actually seemed to find it instructive somehow, and not in the way that he
thought he was coming into.
Yeah.
So tell me just one more thing on Mosque Alert, which is a couple things. So many people, especially now, we want immediate gratification. We want, I came up with the idea today, I want it implemented tomorrow. And you're now talking about, and I showed the screen with all of the sponsors, this had to have been was it like a 5-year process? What was the process from idea? And how it sounds so layered with colleges and everything as well.
And we tend to talk about everything these days as a 10-year process.
Okay.
We start a project and then we realize, oh yeah, this is more complicated than we imagined, and then we start thinking through all these different community pieces. So, but yeah, probably 5-6 years, in terms of the culmination with the world premiere production. But even beyond that, because we then, the next thing was I took Mosque Alert, which was like a 2-hour, full length production, and adapted it as a 45-minute video play. So it's not exactly the same story, but there's a lot of elements from the play in it.
Is that where Obstacle Course TV is? I left the banner up that said Obstacle Course TV. Is that where the 45-minute is, or are there other things related to Mosque Alert there?
So there's mosquealert.org, of course, but obstaclecourse.tv is where you can watch Obstacle Course, which is what the video play adaptation. And we're very proud of it. We've screened it in religious communities, libraries, universities, community centers, so forth. We've done virtual screenings. We've done screenings of it at our theater. And it's always made for robust conversation.
So we only have a few minutes. We actually already only have a few minutes left. So if anybody has any questions, if you're live, please do that. But I hope that's okay. I wanted to talk about Malik and what you're doing now. So Malik Jilani have been here today.
Yes.
So talk, if you want to share what's going on with that, but also I saw one that he was just put in a mural downtown as person of downtown Chicago, and you're now doing programming related to what you've learned with what Malik's been through for the past 3 years.
Yes. So my husband Malik had a heart attack and stroke in the fall of 2019, and he's in recovery. So stroke recovery, obviously, every stroke is different, but it is a process, and it takes time. His expressive capacities, his speaking, so forth, have been affected. And the right side of his body has been affected. That has pretty much come back. The right hand, we're still working on. But it's really now about the speech and reading and writing to a lesser extent. But all of that was affected by the stroke. He's working incredibly hard. His therapists tell me he's like the model patient. I'm so proud of him. And we are always learning about new modalities of neuro recovery. So, this idea that the brain can heal itself, this idea that, can build new pathways, and, all the theories around neuroplasticity and because it used to be believed that the adult brain was fixed, and if it was damaged, it was damaged. But now, with greater knowledge and the advancements in science, we know that the brain has the ability to repair after a stroke, after aneurysm, after traumatic brain injury, and so forth. So, one of our plans is to work with other people, particularly other artists, who have been affected by neurological conditions. And, how do we remain as storytellers? How do we still honor our art? How do we still, create work that is meaningful and impactful and that reaches people, when something like language has been taken away? And then, the recovery of that language, how does that inform artistic expression? So, I'm a caretaker, and, his full-time job basically is recovery. In fact, as I speak, he's with his occupational therapist right now. I think that it's just created a heightened awareness and sensitivity around disability in general, and how do we in the arts communities address issues of disability. And of course, disability plays out in so many different ways. But being more sensitized, being more supportive, being more accommodating, and being more inclusive. With regards to the mural, which is at the corner of Dearborn and Ida B. Wells, which used to be Congress, here in the Loop, that's a mural that was created by Chicago Loop Alliance, or it was commissioned by Chicago Loop Alliance. And Malik was one of the employees of the month of Chicago.
I did not know. So they do an employee of the month every month for all downtown Chicago, or
no? What they did was it's a mural from the first 12 employees of the month, and so if you look at the mural, and everyone has kind of their own story. There's sort of an aspect of each of the 12 people, and then all of their names appear in a star, like at the top of the mural. And Malik, as sort of the storyteller in the group, they used his text, "All roads lead back to the Loop." So it's a beautiful tribute to all that he has contributed and all that, our mission stands for. And particularly as he's in recovery, learning that, you're going to be on a mural. Really,
that was probably really exciting.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So we're very proud.
That's really exciting. So what is next we're on our last minute here. What's next? If people want to find out what's next with Silk Road, they've got your website. We've got Facebook. What do you have? Are you doing things virtually now that we can't be in person?
Yes, and something very exciting. And we just launched what we're calling the first act of Black Teen Lives Matter. So we have a program in Chicago Public Schools, a very active program called EPIC, which is Empathic Playwriting Intensive Course. And we do the program in any number of schools throughout the city. And so this is the work that we have done with Black youth between 2017 and 2020.
Chicago Public Schools, or is it an after-school program?
It's Chicago Public Schools, so it's in-school learning. And we also have EPIC for ELL, for English language learners, for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and for intergenerational, for bringing seniors and young people together. This particular project, so excited about, Black Teen Lives Matter. We just did the first act, very well received, and we're getting wonderful feedback from audiences. We virtual audiences. We were able to bring some of the playwrights from the schools to be part of the presentations, which was great.
That's exciting.
It's fascinating to hear young people write about their lives prior to George Floyd and prior to really the racial reckoning that is occurring in this country, because it was so tied to many of the same issues and circumstances. I mean, obviously, there's a hundreds of year history we're talking about, and these students are incredibly just honest and courageous and thoughtful. So that is a project we're very excited. We'll be rolling out the other 3 acts, in the months to come. We're also working on a project in the West Ridge community on the far north side of Chicago, which is one of the most racially, religiously, culturally, linguistically, economically diverse communities in the United States. We're working on a project called the COVID Monologues. So
interesting.
you have all these different cultural groups and a large, what you might call working poor and working class population of essential workers. So people who don't necessarily have the luxury of working from home or sheltering in place. And we are pairing them with, pairing individuals from different communities with teaching artists to create monologues, to develop monologues that will then be performed by professional actors and shared, live, virtually, or both. Obviously, we will see in the months to come, and lots of work in the works. In terms, we are eager to get back to live theater. We know it's still a while off. And we have fairly ambitious plans for a festival in the next few years. That would be theater and ideas.
Oh my God, which explains why you're so prolific, because your mind is just going everywhere. It's so exciting to hear about it. And what I love too, Jamil, it's one of the things I always get excited when I'm talking to you about is how layered and how process oriented it is. So you always have your final art project, but even if you look at like the Black Teen Lives Matters, that whole process that went into it and the connectivity between people where they're learning about each other to end up in this end project is phenomenal, is really amazing. And another time, I'd love to know more about the intergenerational work. I know Jerry Witkowski does a lot of work with grandparents, and I know he's watching us live. He's absolutely going to want to know how that can be applied to grandparents and their grandchildren to connect to each other.
I love it. I love it. One of our partners in West Ridge is Council for Jewish Elderly. And
you're kidding.
So we're working with them on connecting seniors and teens in the public schools in the community. So there's any number of avenues that we are exploring or that we're in the process of working on. I mentioned intellectual and developmental disabilities. We piloted a program with Misericordia. And also I mentioned English language learning. We're piloting a program with Asian Human Services. So, we want to think very expansively, but we also think of how do we connect communities together and how do we work with community partners?
So this begs the question then. I've said the final question how many times? I can't stop talking to you. This one's really the last one, I promise. What do you think with all these things that you're doing? This show is about intercultural spark. It's about that spark that I like to think is inside each of us. And it's that spark that drives you to spark change in the world. Do you think you could narrow it down? What do you think is that spark inside you that drives all the work that you do?
Well, there are a few sparks, but I'm going to say right now healing. And I think that, when we look at the cultural zeitgeist, when we look at certainly the political duress of this time, there's such a need for healing. And I think that has always been, an important thread, a through line in the work we do, or at least, that we aspire for it to be. How do we build trust? How do we build understanding? How do we build empathy? And it might sound pie in the sky, but it happens. And it happens through stories. It happens through art. It happens when we see ourselves in someone else's story, and we're able to take that journey, and we're able to start answering some of our own questions. And so I think that's that's the beauty of being able to tell stories, of being in the business of storytelling, is that we can help people discover, we can help people learn, we can hopefully help people heal.
That's beautiful. Stay with me. I'm going to end our broadcast, and because we could go on, I'm going to stop my questions now about stories and how they connect people. That's really powerful, Jamil. Thank you so much for being here on Intercultural Spark. Really excited to catch up with you. And
You.
yeah, thank you so much.
Great to be here.